Under the grey weight of a sky ready to break into rain, the old ranch stood silent, the wooden porch creaking in protest, as a lone figure appeared from the mist, her shawl frayed, her boots caked with mud, her hands trembling not from the cold, but from everything life had already taken. She paused before the heavy oak door, swallowed her fear, and knocked once, soft, almost hesitant, and when the door opened to reveal the man whose reputation reached every corner of the valley, she whispered through dry lips, "I was told you need a cook. I'll work for free, forever." The words hung in the air like the last note of a hymn sung at a funeral. The man, tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes carved out of years of solitude and sorrow, stared at her as if she'd spoken madness. His name was Luke Carrigan, a rancher who'd lost more than most men could bear. His wife and unborn child had died 3 winters ago when fever took them, and since then his world had become a stretch of land haunted by silence. He didn't hire strangers, didn't trust help, didn't even go into town except to trade. Yet something in the woman's voice, its desperate dignity, stilled him. "You'll work for free?" he asked finally, the deep timbre of his voice both curious and cautious. "Forever," she said again, her eyes steady, her jaw trembling just enough to betray her exhaustion. "All I need is a roof and a bit of food. I can clean, cook, and tend to the fire. I don't need pay." He studied her, her worn dress, the bruises fading along her wrist, the way her fingers clutched the fabric of her shawl like it was the last barrier between her and collapse. He didn't ask where she came from, though the road dust and fear told part of her story. He only nodded once, stepped aside, and said quietly, "There's a fire in the kitchen. Warm yourself." Inside, the cabin smelled of smoke, horse leather, and loneliness. She stepped in carefully, as though afraid the floorboards might reject her presence. The flicker of firelight danced across the walls, revealing a space barely lived in. No curtains, no laughter, just a table with one chair and the remnants of a meal long gone cold. Luke watched as she moved to the hearth, her hands instinctively finding the poker to stir the embers. He didn't miss the way her shoulders loosened slightly as warmth touched her face. "You can start tomorrow," he said, his tone almost dismissive, but she turned and shook her head. "I've already started," she whispered, pulling a small tin pot from her satchel and filling it with water from the bucket. Within minutes, the smell of steeping herbs filled the room. Mint, chamomile, and something faintly floral. "You look like a man who hasn't rested in months," she said softly. "Drink this before you work yourself to death." He almost barked a laugh, half disbelief, half admiration. "You come here offering to work for free, and now you're telling me how to live?" "Someone should," she said simply. That night after she retired, to the small servants' room near the back of the cabin, Luke sat by the fire with her tea untouched, thinking about her words. He didn't even know her name, yet something about her, the quiet strength, the mystery, itched at the corners of his guarded heart. The next morning, she was already up before dawn, kneading dough in silence. When he stepped into the kitchen, the smell of fresh bread hit him like a memory of a life long gone. "You can call me Clara," she said without looking up. "Clara who?" he asked. "Just Clara." Days turned to weeks, and the house slowly began to change. Curtains appeared where there had been none. The floors shone clean. The sound of clinking dishes, the smell of stew simmering on the stove, even the faint hum of a tune she sang under her breath, brought warmth back into the lifeless walls. Luke tried not to notice. He told himself she was just helping, that he didn't need her beyond her work. But every night when he passed her room and saw the faint candlelight leaking from beneath her door, he wondered what kind of pain had driven her here. One evening a storm rolled in from the north, fierce and wild. The wind tore at the shutters and lightning split the dark sky. Luke had gone out to secure the horses when he saw Clara standing at the edge of the barn, her face tilted upward to the rain, her arms trembling. "Clara!" he shouted over the storm. "Get inside!" She turned slowly, tears mingling with the downpour. "I can't go back," she said, her voice cracking. "Even the rain sounds like him." He froze. realization dawning. Someone had hurt her, someone she'd run from. He took a step closer. "You're safe here," he said, his voice softer than he intended. She shook her head, hugging herself. "No one's ever safe. Not forever." He reached out, his hand hovering just inches from her shoulder, then dropped it. "You don't have to tell me yet," he said quietly. "But one day you will." That night, for the first time, she cried, not in fear, but in release. Luke heard her through the thin walls, his heart twisting with something unfamiliar. He didn't sleep. Instead, he sat by the fire until dawn, thinking about the vow he'd made long ago, never to love again. But by morning, that vow felt weaker than it ever had. As spring came, Clara's laughter began to fill the ranch like birds returning after a long winter. She cooked for the hands who came to help mend fences. She tended the garden. She even scolded Luke when he worked through meals. "You treat your horses better than yourself," she teased one day, setting a plate of biscuits in front of him. "That's because they complain less," he shot back. And for the first time in years, he smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. The men noticed. "Boss looks alive again," one said quietly. But peace, as Luke knew, never lasted. One afternoon, as he rode back from town, he saw dust on the horizon. 3 riders, strangers. He felt it in his gut before he even reached the porch. Clara stood frozen by the door, her face pale, her hands trembling again. "They're here," she whispered. "Who?" he asked sharply. "My husband," she said, the words like poison. The man who rode up was mean-faced, his clothes finer than most, a pistol at his hip. "There you are," he sneered. "Thought you could run off after stealing my money." "Your money?" she spat. "It was my dowry, you drunk." Luke stepped between them. "You best leave, friend." The man's eyes flicked to Luke, measuring him. "Who are you to tell me what to do with my wife?" The word wife hit Luke like a hammer, but Clara's face told the truth. She'd been trapped, not loved. "She's not going anywhere with you," Luke said, low and dangerous. "You want to test that?" The man drawled, reaching for his gun. But he never drew it, because Luke moved faster. A warning shot rang out, kicking up dust near the man's boot. "Next one won't miss," Luke said coldly. "This ranch ain't yours and neither is she." The man's sneer twisted into something darker, but he backed off with a promise. "You'll regret this. Cowboy." The riders turned and disappeared down the trail. Clara's knees gave out, and Luke caught her before she hit the ground. She wept into his chest, shaking. "I should have told you," she whispered. "You didn't have to," he murmured. "I already knew you were running from something. I just didn't know it had a name." From that day on, Luke kept watch. He added locks to the doors, rode the fence lines twice a day, and though he said nothing, Clara could see the fire in his eyes whenever her past was mentioned. She cooked as though every meal was a prayer of gratitude, and he ate as though every bite was a vow to protect her. Slowly, a fragile bond formed between them, not born of romance but of shared survival. Then came the night everything changed. The riders returned, this time with torches. The barn went up in flames before Luke even reached the door. Clara screamed his name and he ran into the fire, cutting the horses loose, coughing through the smoke. She tried to follow, but he shouted, "Stay back!" He emerged covered in soot, dragging the last mare out. But as he turned, one of the men swung a gun toward him. Clara didn't think. She just ran. She grabbed the kitchen rifle from the porch and fired. The man fell. The others fled into the night, leaving only the crackle of burning wood and the smell of fear. Luke turned to her, stunned, and she dropped the rifle, shaking uncontrollably. He stepped forward, caught her face in his hands, and said hoarsely, "You saved my life." Tears blurred her vision. "I owed you mine." He shook his head. "No, Clara. From the moment you knocked on that door, you didn't owe me anything. I made a vow tonight. As long as I breathe, no one will ever hurt you again." And there, under the smoking ruin of his barn, their lives entwined, one forged by loss, the other by escape. He vowed to protect her. She vowed to stay. And though neither spoke the word, love It burned quietly between them like the embers of a fire that refused to die.